Hello, welcome back to my channel where today I wanted to do a very simple craft. I've been very inspired to do some more art stuff in my house recently, and I wanted to do something really simple and easy just to get back into it and to kind of work out exactly what sort of thing I want to do in the future. So for this video we're going to be making a bubble tea sign. It's completely made out of foam and acrylic paint, so it's very easy and very cheap to do, so if you want to do something like this as well, I would highly recommend it because it's so much fun. There's not many steps to it. Again, it's not expensive at all, and it looks really cute in the end. I really like it. I put it above my bed and I think it looks adorable, but I'm rambling, so we're gonna actually get into the process now. I started out by making a little mini mock-up, which you saw right at the beginning of the video, just so I had an idea of how it was gonna look in the end, and then I moved on to making a paper template. This way I would know it would definitely fit together at the end, and I wouldn't have to worry about anything being the wrong size. Next, I made the base of my sign. For this, I used a thicker foam just because I had it on hand, but you could definitely do this with craft foam as well. I don't think it would make much of a difference. I just already had this foam and I thought it'd be good to have a thicker base. Then I started editing down my template so that I could get each layer individually. So the first layer is I just cut off the circle from the outside and I cut the background out of the bubble tea, so it's just a single bubble tea by itself. And I marked this onto craft foam. You can get it quite cheap if you buy it in packs. If you buy it individually, it's always a little bit more expensive, so I would recommend getting the packs instead of the individual colours, because the colours don't actually matter for this craft because we're going to base coat it later on. I then went about just cutting away each section until I had all the layers that I needed. For the third layer, I just cut away the straw, and then the fourth layer is just the outside of the cup, which I sorted out during my mock-up stage, and I feel like this worked really well to get the idea of a layered bubble tea across without using too many layers of foam. I definitely could have used more, but I feel like I didn't really need to, because this worked really well as is. I then moved on to cutting everything out. I started originally with scissors just to get the basic shapes cut out because they were quite big pieces, but I did move on to my craft knife just to make the little fiddly corners much easier. This shape is quite simple, so you could definitely do it with scissors, but craft knives make things so much easier and they're really cheap. I got my craft knife for I think £3 and it came with 5 blades, which I think is a really good deal because you see some craft knives that are really expensive and I'm not quite sure why they're so expensive because they don't seem any different from any of the other craft knives. I also really like this one because the handle is bigger. I don't like the ones with the really skinny handles because they kind of hurt your hand to hold after a while, so the thicker one just makes it a little bit easier to use for a long period of time. Also a note at this point, I was making 2 bubble teas, so I thought that would look cuter on my wall. So you'll see the foam colours changing ever so often in this video just because I'm going backwards and forwards between the two of them, doing the exact same process on each. Also a note, at this point in the recording, I'd only been making this craft for about 30 minutes, so at this point it was a very quick craft. It does get a little bit slower later on just because we're waiting for things to dry, but it's a really good lazy craft. I could just go in and out of doing it and it was really relaxing, so I really would highly recommend this one. With everything cut out, it was finally time to glue everything together. So I use PVA glue, which is a very slow drying glue, but it gets a really strong bond and that's exactly what I wanted for this. You could definitely use a quicker drying glue and it would do the exact same thing, but I already had this and I didn't mind waiting for it, so I just used PVA glue. I just put a very thin layer on every single piece of foam and stuck it together, and then I left it to dry for 24 hours just to make sure it was definitely set, because I've had issues before when my foam wasn't actually stuck together and then I started painting it and it turned a little bit gross, so make sure it's dry before moving on to the next steps. The next step is priming the foam. For this I would recommend using Mod Podge because it is a very good primer for foam, but I don't have any, so I use PVA glue again, and I only filmed this once because it was a little bit too repetitive, but I did go in with 2 layers of the PVA glue just to make sure I had a proper base for the paint that was going to go on later on. It basically just fills in the holes of the foam, meaning that the paint can glide on top of the surface rather than being absorbed because that's going to waste a lot of paint. On to the second prime. For this I go in with white paint. I did 2 layers of this, but again I'm only going to show 1 because it's very repetitive. This just makes the base completely uniform, so the colours are always going to look the same on both of the pieces, and it's not going to take loads of layers of the pastel colours I want to use to cover the black of the foam on the background. All the craft foam is also quite neon. On camera some of them look more pastel, but in person they were definitely a lot brighter and I didn't want any of that showing through. So I feel like this is one of the most important steps of this craft because it makes the final product look really professional even when it's really simple to do. On to the colours in the final painting section. I decided to use pastel primary colours and then I wanted the other one to be slightly different, so I did the liquid green just so they weren't exactly identical because I felt like they would look cuter on my wall if they were ever so slightly different. But for this process I went down the layers just so it would be easier to get the sides, because I always find it's much easier to paint a flat plane rather than trying to get the little side pieces, so this just made the most logical sense to me. And this went really well. I feel like they look really cute. I'm very happy with my colour combinations. Obviously the primary colours always go well together, but for this in particular I feel like they really work and they actually look like real signs that a shop would have, because when I think of bubble tea shops I always think of pastel colours because the the drinks themselves are quite pastels. So I just feel like this works really well for bubble tea, and I feel like they look so cute and adorable, and they also go so well with my room. I have bubble tea lights and they're also pastels, so they just go perfectly together. The final step of painting is obviously going in with the bubbles for the bubble tea. For this, I just used the cap of my setting spray, dipped it in white paint, and then just dotted it around the liquid. I was originally going to make the bubbles also made out of foam, but when I was rethinking it, I thought about how the bubbles would actually be in the liquid, so it doesn't really make much sense for them to be sticking out of it. So that's why I went with paint instead, and I'm so glad I did because it looks really cool. So the absolute final step is varnish. I always find that acrylic paints end up a little bit sticky, so I really like going in with a varnish. I got this varnish really cheap online, but you could again use Mod Podge or you could use PVA glue. I just had this in my house already and I know it's very good and I really like it, so that's what I used. But with that step done, we are now finally finished with this project. So let's move on to the final result. So as I mentioned at the start of this video, I ended up putting the bubble teas above my bed and I think they look so adorable. They really match my room. I feel like they're such a good addition and I'm so happy that I made them. If you did enjoy this video, please give it a like. Comment down below what else you'd like me to do. I really want to do some more simple crafts, so if you have any ideas for that, I would very much like to hear them. And subscribe, as I'm posting 3 times a week for the whole of summer and I'd love to see you again. But until then, bye!